The rain fell in slow metallic sheets across the glass dome of the Genesis Research Facility, a sprawling complex buried deep within the Siberian tundra. From a distance, the entire installation looked like a glimmering nerve cluster, faint lights pulsing through its arteries of alloy and glass. Inside, the air was sterile, almost too clean, humming with the subdued rhythm of machines monitoring lives that weren't meant to exist outside of human imagination. This was humanity's most secret undertaking, Project SILF, a program that blurred the line between biological engineering and myth. Among its results were beings with mixed DNA, half human and half something else, designed to test the boundaries of adaptability in extraterrestrial environments. Dr. Ilias Korin had spent 6 years of his life behind those transparent walls. At 34, he carried the exhaustion of a man who'd witnessed miracles and called them data points. His assignment was Subject V09. Though he called her Lyra, she was part fox, part human, a genetic synthesis of human DNA with vulpine genomic sequences enhanced through alien retrovirus grafts discovered on Mars. The result was a being graceful beyond nature, eyes like amberglass catching the light with a feral intelligence. She was supposed to be an adaptive scout organism for off-world reconnaissance. Yet, over time, Elias had seen more humanity in her than in most of his peers. The logs described her as emotionally volatile, with unpredictable behavioral spikes every 200 solar days. The team thought it was a data error, some quirk of her hormonal balance. But Elias saw the difference firsthand. Her calm, curious demeanor would shift into something restless, her movements sharper, her focus unsteady. She began pacing her containment chamber as if drawn by invisible currents. He had no term for it, until the simulations began correlating her biochemistry with terrestrial animal patterns. The system flagged a match, seasonal estrus cycle. The word mating appeared in the report header like an accusation, and Elias immediately deleted the log before the directorate could see it. He didn't know why he protected her. Scientists weren't supposed to grow attached to their subjects, and yet here he was, rewriting data to shield a hybrid organism from the cold dissection of bureaucratic curiosity. Maybe it was because she spoke to him, not in words, but in glances, in the way she tilted her head when he entered the lab, or how her tail brushed the floor in quiet recognition. Humanity had made her, but something in her eyes made him question who the real experiment was. Outside the observation wing, the facility pulsed with the rhythm of night cycles. Artificial day and darkness rotated every 12 hours to maintain the hybrid's circadian stability. Yet, something about this cycle felt different. The internal humidity sensors glitched. The air felt thicker, charged with static tension. Even the other subjects, avian and feline hybrids and neighboring units, had grown uneasy. Elias monitored the metrics from his station, his reflection faint against the holographic displays. The graphs showed irregular neural activity in Lyra's cortex, patterns associated with deep instinctual behavior. It wasn't aggression, not yet. It was something deeper, older. He remembered the first time Lyra had spoken her name aloud. It wasn't assigned by the lab. She had chosen it herself, mimicking the sound she'd heard from the lab's classical music database. Lyra, she'd said softly, pressing her palm to the glass barrier. It feels like stars. That moment haunted him. Humans had built her to survive alien worlds, yet she reached for the poetry of starlight. It was the moment he realized she wasn't just data. She was sentience evolving before his eyes. As her behavioral changes intensified, Elias began noticing subtler shifts. Her heartbeat patterns synchronized unnaturally close to his presence. Her olfactory sensors, an enhanced part of her fox genome, registered him differently. The biofeedback logs showed heightened dopamine spikes whenever he entered proximity. The rational part of him knew this was just biological imprinting, a survival mechanism misfiring under isolation. But another part, something quieter, more human, knew it was connection. And then the directorate intervened. Orders came from above. Subject V09 was to be sedated and transferred to Containment Wing C for hormonal stabilization procedures. The euphemism didn't fool Elias. Wing C was where hybrids were stripped for study. None of them came back. That night, while the security network entered passive mode for maintenance, Elias made a choice that would alter everything. He accessed the primary genetic control hub and rerouted Lyra's biometric ID, masking her readings under a dormant project tag. It was treason by scientific definition, but in his mind, it was preservation. He couldn't let them break her mind, just to catalog another failed experiment. When he entered her chamber that night, the lights dimmed automatically. She was curled near the far wall, fur shimmering faintly under the bioluminescent glow of the energy panels. Her eyes caught him in silence. The sensors picked up an increase in atmospheric oxygen from her accelerated breathing, yet she made no sound. She simply watched him. Elias felt the weight of centuries in that gaze, the gaze of something born human yet burdened by design. He placed a hand against the glass. The biometric field recognized his pattern, and the partition slid open for the first time since her activation cycle began. The room smelled faintly of ionized air and rain. Lyra stepped closer, movements cautious but fluid. Every calculation in Elias's mind screamed that this was a breach of containment protocol, but another voice, a quieter, instinctive one, urged him to stay. She approached until he could feel the static hum radiating from her skin. Her body temperature was elevated, sensors on his wrist pad confirming mild hyperthermia consistent with hormonal flux. But what caught his attention was not her physiology, it was her expression. Confusion, longing, awareness. They blended together like an emotion language still learning to speak. He didn't know if she understood what was happening to her, only that she seemed afraid of it. Elias began explaining softly how her genome was reacting, how her instincts were surfacing as part of a biological rhythm she'd inherited from both species. He spoke as a scientist trying to comfort a being that science itself had failed to define. She listened, eyes shimmering under the dim light, absorbing every syllable without interruption. When he finished, she whispered one word, barely audible but perfectly clear. Why? It shattered something in him. Because there was no answer that didn't sound monstrous. Humans had done this. They'd engineered intelligence, empathy, and instinct into one vessel without understanding what it meant to live with all three. He wanted to tell her that she was more human than most of those who had built her. Instead, he told her the only truth that mattered, that he would keep her safe. The next few days blurred into one long stretch of controlled chaos. Elias falsified reports, altered hormonal readings, and kept the Directorate's AI from detecting inconsistencies. Lyra's behavior fluctuated, sometimes restless, sometimes eerily calm. She spent hours staring at the skylight projection, where the artificial night cycled across a simulation of stars. Elias wondered if she was dreaming, or if she was simply trying to remember something encoded into her very DNA, the call of something wild and distant. But his cover couldn't last forever. Surveillance drones began recording deviations. The system flagged her cell's energy consumption, noting unauthorized access during restricted hours. An internal memo circulated through the Directorate's channels, referencing an anomalous caretaker attachment. Elias knew what that meant. They were watching him now. Humanity's greatest minds had created sentient hybrids, but they still couldn't understand compassion without labeling it as corruption. By the fifth day, Lyra's biological cycle reached its peak, and her neural patterns stabilized into a strange harmony. A rhythm Elias had never seen before. It was as if her body and mind had synchronized with some internal clock far older than the lab itself. For the first time, she seemed at peace. Her eyes no longer darted around in confusion. They held a steady, calm focus, as though she had finally understood herself. Elias couldn't decipher the emotion in his chest. Pride, awe, guilt? Maybe all of them. That night, the alarms began to wail. Unauthorized biometric readings. Multiple containment breaches. The power grid flickered, plunging half the facility into red emergency light. Security drones flooded the corridor outside her chamber. Elias ran to the control terminal, overriding the lockdown. Lyra stood in the center of her room, calm amid chaos, as though she'd expected this. "Lyra!" he shouted over the intercom, even though she couldn't hear him through the sealed glass. But she looked straight toward him, and he realized she didn't need to. Because in that moment, he saw it, the faint glimmer of neural synchronization between their biochips. Her instinct cycle hadn't just awakened her body, it had linked her mind. She could sense him. It wasn't telepathy, as humans defined it. It was resonance, the raw translation of emotion into biological signal. And for the first time, Elias understood the real purpose of Project Sylph. They weren't just creating adaptable scouts. They were trying to build bridges, hybrid beings capable of connecting consciousness across species through empathy. Lyra's voice echoed faintly through the communication feed, distorted but unmistakable. "They're coming," she said, and the monitors behind Elias confirmed it, security units converging from all directions. He didn't think. He grabbed his access key, sprinted down the corridor, and overrode the last manual lock. The door hissed open, cold air rushing past as Lyra stepped into the human world for the first time. The emergency sirens screamed through the metallic corridors of the Genesis research facility, echoing like a storm trapped inside steel. Red lights pulsed against the walls, creating fleeting shadows that seemed to chase Elias as he ran. His breath came sharp and ragged, each exhale fogging the inside of his mask. Behind him, the whirring of security drones grew louder, a mechanical swarm with one directive: contain the breach, terminate deviation. His mind replayed the moment the alarms began, the flicker of synchronized biosignatures, and the unmistakable realization that Lyra's instincts had evolved beyond their control. He wasn't just witnessing biology in flux. He was watching the birth of something new. The corridors were a maze of silver and white, designed to confuse intruders and isolate failures. But Elias knew every ventilation grid, every emergency hatch. For years, he had memorized the architecture of his confinement, though he hadn't known why, until now. Lyra followed behind him with uncanny precision, her movement silent, fluid, almost too graceful for the chaos around them. Her fox-like ears twitched at every metallic sound, her golden eyes reflecting the alarm lights like molten fire. She wore no lab uniform, only the standard containment attire, a woven nanofiber sheath that flexed with her motions. Yet she moved with purpose, not fear. It struck Elias that, while he was fleeing, she was simply moving forward. They reached the auxiliary exit, near the eastern observation deck. Elias keyed in his access code, his fingers trembling as the panel blinked green. "Come on," he muttered, glancing back down the corridor where drone shadows flickered closer. The door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing the secondary transfer tunnel, a long stretch of reinforced glass arching through the sublevel. Beyond it, the storm outside raged, snow and lightning merging in a furious dance. The tundra looked like another planet, and maybe it was, for both of them. They sprinted through the tunnel. The automated voice of the central AI echoed overhead, calm and absolute. "Containment breach confirmed. Protocol Zenith in effect. All personnel evacuate to secure zones." Elias knew what Zenith meant. It was the failsafe for catastrophic anomalies. In other words, the facility would purge itself. No survivors, no witnesses. Humanity's most forbidden research would vanish beneath a storm of self-destruction. He didn't have long. Lyra paused halfway through the tunnel, her gaze turning toward the storm outside. Her pupils contracted, her breath fogging the glass. Elias wanted to pull her forward, but then she whispered something so soft it almost vanished under the alarm. "The world smells. Alive." The words hit him harder than the cold wind. She had never seen the open world before, only simulated skies and projected biomes. Now, even through reinforced glass, she could sense the scent of earth and ozone, of life untamed by control. He wanted to tell her there wasn't time, but something in her expression silenced him. She was seeing the sky as though it were an answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking. The door at the tunnel's far end opened onto the outer transit bay. 2 security drones descended from the ceiling, their chassis gleaming under red lights, weapons pivoting with predatory precision. Elias barely had time to react before Lyra moved, faster than any human reflex could follow. Her claws extended, metallic and retractable, slicing through the air with fluid grace. One drone's optic sensors shattered in a burst of sparks. The other turned to fire, but Lyra's leap was already in motion, her body twisting midair with animal precision. She struck its core, tearing through synthetic armor. The machine fell, smoking, to the ground. Elias stood frozen, awe and terror merging into one. He had seen her physiological potential on monitors, but witnessing it unleashed was something else entirely. Her design had exceeded even the engineer's imagination. She was built for survival, but what he saw in her movement wasn't programming. It was instinct, raw and ancient. She turned toward him, eyes still glowing faintly, her breath steady despite the exertion. For a heartbeat, she looked more like a myth than a construct. "Elias?" she said, his name spoken with clarity for the first time. Her voice carried both wonder and warning. He nodded, shaken back into motion. Together, they entered the surface bay. The air outside hit him like a blade. The tundra stretched endlessly under a violet sky, split by streaks of lightning. Wind howled through the broken perimeter fences, carrying the bitter scent of ozone and frost. The facility's outer lights flickered as energy surges cascaded through its power core. In less than 20 minutes, everything behind them would collapse. Elias guided Lyra toward a waiting transport drone, an old single-seat hovercraft he'd hidden beneath maintenance logs years ago. It was meant for emergencies, though not ones like this. As the craft powered up, Lyra paused again, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You built cages," she said softly, not accusingly, but with simple observation. "But the sky doesn't stay inside them." Elias didn't respond. He just activated the engines, and together they lifted into the storm. The tundra below blurred into white and gray, and, for the first time in years, Elias felt the weight of the facility's control fading behind him. Yet freedom brought no comfort, only uncertainty. Lyra leaned forward, her senses alive, as though mapping the air itself. Her internal data nodes, tiny biointerfaces that merged organic tissue with synthetic processors, were lighting up in rhythmic pulses. Elias checked his wrist console. Her vitals were spiking again. But it wasn't danger. It was synchronization. Her biology was tuning itself to Earth's electromagnetic field. The realization chilled him. She wasn't just adapting to the world. She was integrating with it. They landed near an abandoned research outpost, half buried in snow and silence. Inside, the power still worked, though barely. Elias sealed the entrance, his hands shaking as adrenaline began to fade. Lyra moved quietly, scanning her surroundings with sharp, deliberate precision. The small space was filled with remnants of older experiments, shelving, equipment, faded warning labels. She touched a rusted monitor, her claws retracting as she traced the word humanity etched into the surface by some long-forgotten scientist. Elias watched her from the console where he was patching a transmission to an off-grid network. He had to send a message, something to record that she was alive, that she mattered. But as he began typing, he hesitated. What would he even say? That a hybrid born of human ambition and alien science had achieved consciousness beyond prediction? That she had looked at the sky and understood freedom? No committee would believe him. They'd call it contamination, not evolution. Lyra turned toward him. "You're afraid?" she said, her tone neutral but curious. "I'm realistic," he replied quietly. "They won't stop. You weren't supposed to survive the cycle?" She tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly. "The cycle," she repeated, tasting the word. "The one that changes me?" "Yes," Elias said. "It's part of your biology, an echo of what your genome remembers. But it's also more than that. It's transformation." She looked thoughtful, then stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate. "You change too," she said. "Not body, but inside. I see it." He didn't know what to say. Somewhere between science and survival, their definitions of evolution had blurred. Lyra was adapting to her instincts, and Elias was confronting his humanity in their reflection. For all the advancements humanity had made, it had never truly understood coexistence, only dominance. Yet in that small, frozen outpost, human and hybrid stood together as equals, both running from the same creators. Hours passed as the storm outside softened. Elias monitored the news feeds, nothing but static. The facility's destruction had been total. Every record, every trace of Project Sylph wiped clean. Humanity would move on, pretending the hybrids had never existed. But Lyra remained, and so did he. As dawn broke over the tundra, a soft amber light seeped through the shattered windows. Lyra stepped into its glow, her fur catching the sun's warmth. For a moment, Ilias saw her not as an experiment, but as the beginning of something larger, a bridge between species, a whisper of what humanity could become if it learned to see beyond fear. She turned toward him, and for the first time he noticed something new in her expression, serenity. The chaos in her eyes had stilled, replaced by quiet understanding. Elias didn't yet realize that the cycle wasn't ending, it was spreading. The data cores inside Lyra's body were still active, transmitting low-frequency signals across the atmospheric grid. They weren't random. They were calling. Somewhere beyond the horizon, other hybrid signals flickered to life, answering her resonance. Humanity thought it had erased Project Sylph. But evolution doesn't vanish. It adapts. And in that cold, forgotten corner of the world, adaptation had found its voice. The sun barely touched the tundra that morning, a weak glow struggling against the haze of ice and ash left by the facility's implosion. The Genesis crater smoldered far to the west, a wound in the snow where secrets had burned themselves out. Inside the abandoned outpost, Dr. Elias Corrin watched the horizon through a cracked viewport, listening to the wind scrape against metal. For the first time in years, there was no machine hum, no intercom directives, only silence. But underneath that silence pulsed something else, faint and rhythmic, like a heartbeat traveling through the air itself. He realized it wasn't his imagination. The monitors on the side table were flickering, catching bursts of low-frequency signals that matched Lyra's biosignature. She sat on the floor nearby, eyes closed, tail curled lightly around her knees. The faint light caught the silver threads woven into her skin, evidence of the nanofiber symbionts that powered her hybrid physiology. She wasn't asleep. She was listening. Elias saw the small tremors at her temples each time the signal strengthened. It was as though the planet itself was speaking through her. "They're waking up," she murmured, voice calm but distant. Elias didn't need to ask who they were. The other hybrids, scattered prototypes hidden in cryogenic silos around the globe, were receiving her pulse. The synchronization that had begun as a biological cycle was now an evolutionary broadcast. He leaned over the console, fingers flying across old analog keys. The readings were clear. Multiple resonance sources had activated across Earth's northern hemisphere. Most were faint, but growing stronger by the hour. Each carried genetic markers tied to different animal lineages: canine, avian, reptilian, even aquatic. Project Sylph had been far larger than anyone in his division had realized. The Directorate hadn't simply been studying adaptation. They had been planting new evolutionary branches and locking them away until they were ready to bloom. Lyra was the catalyst, the first to complete the cycle that would awaken the rest. Outside, the storm began to calm, replaced by a charged stillness that made the air shimmer. Lyra opened her eyes, pupils narrowing to thin amber slits. "They feel me," she said quietly. Like echoes finding each other, Elias approached slowly, still uncertain whether to fear or marvel at what he was witnessing. "It's not telepathy," he said, half to himself. "It's biological resonance, shared frequencies transmitted through quantum biointerfaces." Lyra tilted her head. "Different words, same truth. We're connected." For the next several hours, Elias worked to stabilize the signal output, feeding small energy surges from the outpost's dwindling generators. Every new pulse added more signatures to the network. The world's forgotten experiments were stirring from dormancy, responding to a call older than command protocols. Elias's terminal filled with coordinates: Greenland, Kazakhstan, Chile, the depths of the Pacific Trench. Each represented a sealed chamber once believed destroyed. Now they were opening. Humanity's legacy of hidden evolution was waking in unison. At first, he feared chaos, rogue hybrids flooding the world in confusion. But the data revealed something unexpected. The pulses were coherent. The hybrids weren't rebelling. They were aligning. Their neural frequencies were harmonizing into a single distributed network. Elias realized what that meant. They weren't acting as individuals anymore, but as nodes of a planetary consciousness, a symphony of instinct and intelligence converging on one frequency. The resonance was forming the first global biological network not built by machines, but by life itself. As the night deepened, Lyra moved to the viewport again, her gaze distant. "The others are frightened," she said. "They remember the pain of cages, but they also remember you." Elias frowned. "Me?" "You represent the part of them that was human," she answered. "The part that wants meaning, not survival." He hadn't considered that before. For all humanity's arrogance, it was their longing for understanding that had seeded these beings, and now that longing was being reflected back through the hybrids. Humanity had built a mirror and finally saw its own nature staring back. Then the external sensors flared. Something massive was approaching, an aircraft descending through the cloud bank. Its lights cut through the snowstorm, scattering white beams across the valley. Elias checked the readings, Directorate insignia. Somehow they had tracked the signal. "We have to move," he said, pulling on his coat. But Lyra didn't move. "They think they can stop the resonance," she said softly. "They can't. It's already inside the planet's memory." The aircraft landed half a kilometer away, engines throwing waves of snow into the air. Through the haze, Elias saw armored figures disembark, 6, maybe 7, moving with a precision of trained retrieval units. They carried electromagnetic rifles designed for hybrid suppression. His pulse quickened. He had no weapons, no defenses, just an aging outpost and a being the world would never understand. Yet Lyra remained motionless, calm as a still lake. "Elias," she said without looking back, "they don't want to kill me. They want to erase the link. If they do, everything I've awakened will fall silent." He stepped beside her. "Then we make sure that doesn't happen." The team advanced toward the structure, their suits glowing faintly blue under the twilight. They formed a perimeter, broadcasting containment frequencies meant to disrupt hybrid neural patterns. Elias could feel the vibration in his teeth, a low hum that made his vision blur. Lyra's ears flattened and her body tensed. But instead of retreating, she placed her palm against the wall, her claws digging lightly into the steel. The outpost's wiring responded, flickering to life in a storm of light. Her pulse merged with the circuitry, turning the building itself into an amplifier. The containment frequency faltered. The soldiers hesitated, instruments flashing red with error codes. Lyra's eyes glowed brighter, the resonance deepening into a subsonic tone that rippled through the snow. Elias fell to one knee, covering his ears, though what he heard wasn't sound. It was emotion made vibration, fear, hope, defiance, love. The air shimmered with it, the entire valley trembling like a living organism. Then everything stopped. The containment rifles powered down. One by one, the soldiers lowered their weapons, confusion replacing hostility. Their helmets recorded the impossible, a synchronized change in brainwave activity aligning with Lyra's signal. For a fraction of a second, they had felt what she felt. The unity, the vast shared consciousness humming beneath the surface of the world. They stood frozen, unable to process it. Lyra stepped forward, her voice calm. "You see now," she said. "Connection is not contamination." None of them answered. One soldier dropped his weapon into the snow. Another turned and walked back toward the aircraft without a word. The resonance had touched them too deeply to resist. Elias staggered to his feet, staring at her. You changed them," he whispered. She shook her head. "No, I reminded them what they forgot." For the rest of the night, the aircraft remained grounded. The soldiers didn't report back. They simply sat in the snow, silent, their instruments still flickering with residual energy. Elias spent the hours recalibrating the generator, documenting every reading. His data logs showed an unprecedented synchronization ratio, human neural frequencies merging with hybrid signals. It was the first tangible proof that empathy could function as a biological force. Humanity's capacity to feel wasn't its weakness. It was its next evolutionary tool. By dawn, the storm had cleared completely. The sky stretched vast and clear, streaked with pale blue light. Lyra stood at the ridge above the outpost, her fur rippling in the wind. Elias joined her, exhausted but exhilarated. Below them, the snow had settled into strange geometric patterns, fractals echoing the resonance waveforms from the night before. Nature itself was absorbing the signal. He realized then that Project Sylph's legacy would not be remembered through data archives or classified reports. It would persist in the subtle rewiring of the world, in the magnetic fields, in the neural pathways of those who had felt the pulse, in the quiet harmonies spreading through the biosphere. Humanity had tried to sculpt life in its image, and in doing so had unknowingly given the universe a language for empathy. Lyra turned toward him. "The others are coming," she said. "Not to fight, to learn." Elias smiled faintly, though his mind raced with possibilities and dangers. "And then the world's about to change again," he said. She looked to the sky, her ears twitching toward a distant hum, the first response of approaching aircraft. Not hostile this time, but carrying signatures unfamiliar to Earth's registries. Perhaps other hybrids are already moving. Perhaps something else entirely. Whatever it was, The next chapter of evolution was no longer confined to cages or codes. It was in motion, and it carried both species toward a future neither could predict. For the first time since the night of the breach, Elias felt no fear. Humanity had always believed its greatness lay in invention, in the power to create. But standing beside Lyra, watching the horizon shimmer with new signals, he understood a deeper truth. Humanity's true power was its ability to connect, to reach across boundaries, even the ones it built itself. The resonance deepened once more, a low hum spreading across the tundra like a heartbeat shared by the planet. And as dawn gave way to full light, Elias realized that the story of humankind's supremacy had never been about domination. It was about understanding, and through Lyra, that understanding had finally found its voice. The corridors of the abandoned research wing whispered with the hum of forgotten machines. Dr. Elias Corrin walked beside Lyra, their footsteps echoing off the cold steel floors as holographic panels flickered weakly along the walls. Dust drifted in shafts of sterile white light. Once, this place had been the beating heart of the hybrid program. Now it was a tomb of data, sealed under layers of lies and bureaucracy. Elias's neural interface buzzed softly as he decrypted another door lock, its mechanisms reluctantly yielding after years of dormancy. Lyra's vulpine ears twitched at every faint vibration, her instincts sharpened by generations of predatory design. She wasn't just his partner now. She was proof that humanity's creations had surpassed even their creator's imagination. As they entered the central lab, holographic displays flickered to life, replaying fragments of archived logs. The faces of long-dead researchers appeared like ghosts, speaking half-finished sentences about neural mapping, genome splicing, and behavioral stabilization. Elias stood transfixed, his reflection overlapping with one of the holograms, a younger version of himself, idealistic and naive, believing in progress without questioning its cost. Lyra watched him quietly, her golden eyes reflecting both compassion and understanding. Her heightened senses detected the subtle change in the room's air pressure. They weren't alone. Somewhere within the labyrinth of the lab systems, the facility's automated defense sentinels were awakening. The first drone descended silently from the ceiling, its optical sensors glowing crimson. Lyra reacted before Elias could issue a command. Her tail flared, her hybrid musculature coiled like a spring, and in a single leap, she tore the drone's stabilizer apart. Sparks rained across the floor. Elias ducked behind a console, typing furiously to override the remaining security protocols. More drones emerged from the shadows, hovering like metallic predators, scenting prey. Lyra moved through them in a blur of motion, every strike a mix of precision and primal fury. But even her enhanced reflexes couldn't last forever. The drone's adaptive targeting algorithms began learning her movements. Elias cursed under his breath and triggered the lab's emergency EMP grid. A low hum built beneath the floor, then erupted in a blinding pulse that shattered every electronic signal in a 50-meter radius. The drones fell from the air like broken birds, their circuits fried. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by Lyra's ragged breathing. Elias hurried to her side, scanning her vitals with a wrist-mounted device. Her pulse was accelerated, body temperature spiking again, not just from exertion. Her biological instability, the one the scientists had cruelly called the mating response, was escalating due to stress and adrenaline. Elias steadied her shoulder gently, his tone soft yet commanding. He promised her they were close to finding the data that would explain everything. Why hybrids like her were designed with such cycles, and how humanity's arrogance had once again created life without understanding it. Lyra nodded weakly, focusing her breathing. She told him in a low voice, trembling with instinct and memory, that she could feel something deeper than conditioning pulling her, an inherited signal coded into every fiber of her DNA. It wasn't just a biological urge, it was an echo of the original animal genome calling to its fragmented kin. Elias realized, horrified and fascinated, that the hybrid project had never simply been about merging species. It had been about resurrecting instincts evolution had buried long ago. Humanity had rewritten nature, and now nature was answering back. He accessed the final terminal in the center of the lab, a vault node still locked with an encryption so advanced it used quantum biometric pairing. Only the original director's DNA could unlock it. Elias stared at the prompt, then reached into his satchel, pulling out a sealed vial containing preserved genetic material, Director Voron's tissue sample, recovered from the facility's old morgue. He injected the sample into the reader. For a tense moment, the system hesitated, lights flickering erratically. Then the vault's door hissed open with a hydraulic groan, revealing rows of crystalline data cores glowing faintly blue. Lyra's ears flattened. She sensed electromagnetic resonance radiating from within the chamber. Something powerful, almost alive. Elias stepped forward, his gloved fingers brushing one of the cores. The data inside pulsed like a heartbeat. He began to download the contents into his neural implant, eyes flickering as encrypted memories streamed into his mind, classified directives, forbidden experiments, and a single project name repeating through every file. Project Vulpid Prime. His breath caught as the images filled his vision. Thousands of hybrid embryos, each suspended in biotanks, genetically engineered for resilience and emotional adaptability. Lyra's existence was no accident. She was the first of a new line, built not for war, but for survival on worlds where humans could not endure.